Welcome to Alternate Endings.
Half audiobook.
Half podcast.
Full apocalypse.
New episodes every Monday.
Start your week considering how everything could come to an end.
The Columbia Broadcasting System and its affiliated stations present Orson Welles and the Mercury Theater on the Air in The War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells. Ladies and gentlemen, the director of the Mercury Theater and star of these broadcasts, Orson Welles. Before we get too far, introduce ourselves. Ivan Wayne here.
Tyler Chrisley on this end.
That is how the original broadcast of War of the Worlds began on October 30th of 1938. This was the first and only reminder that this story would be fictional or fake in any way until minute 39 of the broadcast. Almost 40 minutes went where people were likely to think that it was real. And many people did not hear this original beginning because a very popular radio show was on at the same time called The Chase and Sanborn Hour. But the problem is that night is a really banger show. It's really popular. They had a musical guest that many people didn't know. So about 5-10 minutes into the Chase and Sanborn Hour, people tuned in to War of the Worlds, which means they missed that first fictional warning and did not receive one for another 30 to 35 minutes.
So they spent the full first half, essentially, of this story not knowing if it was true or not. Listener, I hope that you thought Ivan's story was real until the very end, because, you know, a lot of the people back then, I shouldn't even say a lot. I mean, I saw some statistics that you had about how they think only 1 in 12 of listeners actually thought this was real. But, I mean, if the whole idea of radio at the time was, it took everything. That was the media people consumed. So 1 in 12 at the time is a lot. It's a lot more than the 3 or 4 people we'd be getting to listen to it.
Yeah. So it was really interesting. I want to mention some of my sources up top. And if I had to pick one for you, listener, to go out there and please consume yourself, that would be the episode of Radiolab, War of the Worlds. It's just what it's titled. Goes into so many fascinating things. I've intentionally left out a lot of details, so please go listen to that. That's our main source for today. Also, Tyler and I both listened to the War of the Worlds original broadcast on YouTube. It is slightly over an hour long. I also listened to the entire recording of the Buffalo, New York version that happened in 1968. I also got that from YouTube, and we both had the full script on a PDF document from berkeley.edu, and I pulled a little bit from history.com.
Yeah, I mean, you can find all of this all over the internet, and if you haven't listened, especially to the Orson Welles, I remember hearing about it in high school, just about the idea of this happening, because I think War of the Worlds is such an iconic sci-fi moment in history, because they took a story that everyone should have known was fake and put it on a radio broadcast where a vast majority of it was just purely the storytelling. And if any of you listeners actually decide to go and listen to it, I mean, there's a bunch of parts that I think as a modern day, up to the point we are with technology, no one would ever sit and think the entirety of 1 hour. If they listened to the whole thing, they would never believe it was a real moment, because there's too many discrepancies in how they go about the broadcast. And I think now more than ever, we're trained to notice those types of things in our media.
Well, this happened in the late 30s, so people were not on their A game for detecting BS. And this type of thing hadn't been done before.
I mean, it's beyond its years. It took, until you said the 60s for another sort of remake of this type of event to happen?
So the second one happened in 1949, and then the third one was 1968.
What was the second one?
So the second one happened in South America. And this is a really fascinating one. But let's backtrack a little bit, because there are some people, and I found out before we record this, who aren't even sure what this event was. If you're not aware, in 1938, October 30th, the night before Halloween, a broadcast went out, and they had the idea to possibly read War of the Worlds, just verbatim. But Orson Welles, the host, and the Mercury Theater wanted to do a dramatization. So they put in local landmarks. They made it seem like an alien invasion was truly happening in New Jersey and that the alien machines were heading towards New York City. And some people tuned in and thought it was real, and a small panic erupted.
So is this purely just a local broadcast through New York and Northeast region, or was this broadcasted all over the country?
Just in the Northeast area. It was
Okay.
like a New York City, New Jersey area radio station.
Okay.
Yeah. So the second one that happened actually was a lot more intense, and I did not know about this until I listened to the Radio Lab episode. But a Spanish language version was produced in February of 1949, and the company who put it out was called Radio Quito, and this happened in Quito, Ecuador. And they shared their building with El Comercio, which was a local newspaper. And weeks and days leading up to the broadcast, they actually got El Comercio, the local newspaper, to publish articles about mysterious signals coming from Mars, strange activity, and so people were kind of already on high alert about these kind of things.
Full-on immersion leading up to an event that they had planned for, however long they thought about it.
Yes, and if you were not on the team that was acting or running the broadcast, you did not know about it. Other people in El Comercio did not know this was fake, and other people at the radio station did not know this was fake.
Dang.
They also impersonated the mayor and local elected officials and tried to act like them and sound like them so that people would think that this was truly as real as it comes.
Used entirely real names compared to Orson. Just adds that whole extra level of how could you even begin to deny any of this is happening.
Yeah.
So what came of that?
So people freaked out, and in their version of the story, there was a poisonous gas cloud to the south, and the machines were tearing up the northern side of the city. When people started calling in and freaking out, and the director of the program realized how chaotic the city had become because people thought it was real, they came on and started telling people, hey, this is fictional, please don't worry. And when people found out it was fake, they marched straight up to the radio station and started rioting outside. And eventually a large enough group gathered that they started hurling rocks and stones into the radio station, and they broke in, and eventually they set the building on fire. Now, here's the irony. They called the local military and the police to come save them at the radio station, but the actual police and the actual military were responding to alien threats because they thought it was real.
Because they thought it was real,
So
too.
no one answered their 911 calls, and 7 people died from the radio station.
Holy crap. 7 fatalities. Were there any... I'm assuming the radio people from Orson Welles, no one died from that, but you can just imagine the panic. I'm sure maybe even in Quito, people died from the panic too, but do you have any numbers on people who maybe freaked out a little too much or panic attack or...
No, and very fascinating aspect of the whole thing about back in 1938 in the original broadcast in New Jersey. The number of people who actually got to tune in and hear it is heavily debated, and some people think that the newspaper articles that were written in the subsequent days after the event were inflated because at that time, which I didn't know this was occurring in the late 30s, there was a real kind of tribal war happening between newspapers and radio. And newspapers really took this opportunity to say, look, radio can mislead you. Radio will trick you. It is not the sustainable, accurate source that you can trust. And many people think that the surveys the newspapers sent out, they inflated the results to make it seem like the incident was a lot worse than it really was.
Wow, so they briefly told the world more people were listening, an attempt to say, hey, they misguided all of you. Come back to us. We are your true news source.
Yeah.
That's pretty crazy.
And then the third very popular, widely known broadcast of this happened on October 30th, 1968 in Buffalo, New York. This was the 30th anniversary of the original broadcast from Orson Welles.
Do you know how many times they interrupted it and said it was fake on this one?
Dude, so get this. They told people every hour for 3 weeks beforehand that it would be fake. They also put a very lengthy introduction of a 1-hour broadcast. I listened to the whole thing. The first 8 minutes is a warning that what you're about to hear is fictional. And they even talked about what societal effects would lead people to be so gullible to believe a fictional event. 38 minutes into the broadcast, the director threatened to rip the tape out of the machine because the radio station was receiving hundreds of phone calls from people who thought it was real.
For the Buffalo, New York one too?
And listening to the whole broadcast, they would remind people like every 10-ish minutes that it was fake, and people still tuned in caught one whiff of the story and freaked out.
And immediately called in. Is it all along the same lines of aliens who come and invade? There's mechanical monsters that come down and they wreak havoc on the city.
Yeah, all three of these are loose interpretations on the H.G. Wells War of the Worlds story, where there's weird signals from Mars, and then all of a sudden there's an object heading towards Earth, and then it lands, and then, oh my goodness, there's aliens, and then there's machines, and then by the end of it, they die of bacteria.
So even along the same lines of breaking news, and that they receive some sort of signal, they figure it out, and these creatures that come down, but instead of it being big metal type of beasts, they look like humans. Mm-hmm. And so I think especially in modern day today, that kind of freaks us out even more, because we talk a lot about what could be out there, and the more we learn and the more satellites they launch and the more research they do, we have the idea that there could be life out there. So what if all of a sudden these aliens come and visit, and not only are they attacking, but every time they let some of their race out, it looks exactly like us. Mm-hmm. Whether that's how all carbon-based life, eventually this form comes out at some point, or if they figured out, hey, we know what this planet's equivalent species essentially looks like, let's look like that and disguise ourselves and then go in.
Yeah, in my mind, once the sphere landed, it scanned humans, and then they just made them right there.
And that's what they let out.
Yeah, they basically transformed into what they wanted to look like to blend in with the species that were around.
So what do you think, what do you imagine they looked like beforehand? Did you have any sort of idea?
Nope. I had no idea. I just knew I did not want it to be aliens from Mars, and I did not want them to be giant machines, and I did not want them to fail. So if this story had continued, they'd be incredibly successful and they would take over Earth.
And you would just never know. A big part of the story, you're talking about how they eventually fail. Going into the Orson Welles broadcast, the dramatization, I love the part where Pearson, the scientist, is one of the last people. He's documenting all of the stuff that he's kind of going over, and he's walking along, and time is traveling forward fast, which, in my mind, obviously I'm listening to it prior to, so I know it's not real. But listening to him, like, he literally just traveled 100 miles in 2 seconds. Mm-hmm. How could anyone think this is real? But beyond that, he meets this stranger, and they have this conversation back and forth, like, oh, what do you think's going to happen? And the stranger's like, oh, they're basically going to make us their pets, or they're going to breed us, and the best of us are going to work for them, and I'm not going to let that happen. And they kind of make this guy seem like a nut job, which obviously it would do to a lot of people, but I just think it's so interesting that in a world where that's probably some of the first people they've seen in a while and they encountered, it's so short-lived, and automatically he writes him off as, oh, this guy has got the wrong idea, I'm going to leave. I just think it's crazy what an event like this would actually do to a person.
Yeah, not everybody would handle it well. Not everybody would be ready to band together and make wise decisions. Some people would just be freaking out and would lose a part of their sanity.
And how do those people end up being the ones who survive? Is it hyperactive attention
luck.
And luck? I guess that's very true.
Yeah. In the Buffalo broadcast, I wanted to read a direct quote from their recording when they started getting too many calls. So this is from the Buffalo, New York broadcast in 1968. We remind you what you're listening to is a dramatization of H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds on WKBW Radio, 1520 on your Buffalo dial. I repeat, this is a dramatization. It is a play. It is not happening in any way, shape, or form. What you are listening to is a dramatization of H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds as being portrayed on WKBW 1520 Buffalo. The time is 2 1/2 minutes before 12 o'clock.
They played that in the middle of the actual recording?
Yeah, they disrupted it. And This is after probably 6 to 8 other warnings that this was fictional.
On top of the weekly ones that they were getting beforehand.
And one thing I noticed from the Buffalo recording is how often they promoted themselves in the recording, which is one reason why Victoria, the news reporter in the story, keeps mentioning their news station's name. As, you know, she's probably having a boss who's like in her headset that says, don't forget to mention our radio name. Don't forget to mention our radio name. Like, in the midst of the world collapsing, we still have to try to generate marketing and ad revenue.
Listen to KSMJPQ Radio. We are your source. Oh, and by the way, we're getting blown up over here, but you're hearing it. on KSM JQ7 radio. It makes sense. I feel like even nowadays it's advertisements everywhere. That's kind of the whole goal of any sort of product nowadays is, listen to alternate endings, like listen to alternate endings and you should listen to it. It's everywhere.
Listener, if you were intrigued / frustrated / over the ads, that was on purpose. On the original broadcast, instead of any advertisements, they would randomly cut to music. So they would be like, oh, we've had this alien signal, and now we're going to go back to Raquel Welch and the Zingers, and they'd go and play a full song. And people would be sitting there for 3.5 minutes like, come on, come back.
What is happening?
Yeah, and then they'd cut right back. And that was one of the things that people who thought it was real said that freaked them out the most was the waiting. And Orson Welles admitted that if he had had full control of the broadcast, they would have played a lot more music.
Really? It would have been even more so.
He wanted to stretch it out for people even more. So I tried to time the ads where they'd be in some of the worst spots for people who were waiting to see what was going to happen.
And then they'd interject some sort of and for this, the ads are so pointed. Do you have your house insurance? Hey, you're stressing out. Why not have a nice, refreshing beer? It's so... What car do you have to drive to get away?
Yeah.
Does yours have 4-wheel drive? Oh, no. Well, come check this baby out. It'll get you through any problem.
Yeah, all the ads were supposed to be doomsday, prepper, end of the world type companies.
And I know for me, if I were to hear that nowadays and there was no sort of, hey, this is a warning, this is fake, it would either make it feel fake on its own or it would make it feel like they knew it was going to happen beforehand. It was just a culmination of them trying to sell really quickly towards these products and be like, oh, we knew this was going to happen, but we're telling you about it now, so you better hurry up and come get our product because it's the only thing that's going to save you.
Well, do you know about Pizza Hut and the O.J. Simpson chase?
I don't know that.
Many people were upset at Pizza Hut because the amount of Pizza Hut commercials that aired during the live Bronco police chase of O.J. Simpson back in the mid-90s was apparently absurd. That there were so many Pizza Hut commercials that a lot of people thought that they had the network waiting for some sort of live emergency, and then they could just cut to all these Pizza Hut commercials. People were pissed.
They think some sort of conspiracy about maybe they knew it was going to happen, or was Pizza Hut literally just waiting, hey, next time a major event happens, play these on repeat. Here's the money in advance. We'll just wait for that to happen because it's bound to.
Well, I myself have had this thought. I find it disturbing and kind of dirty, and I don't know what the workaround for this is, but people will, in the case of an emergency or an awful tragedy, people turn to the news. And news stations, they're all guilty of it, whether it be local or national or international. They'll break away from an emergency situation to sell you advertisements. And people are almost essentially held hostage in their own home to these ads because they're scared and they want to know what happens next, but they can't until they go through these 5 or 6 BS ads that make the news company, and they're like, oh, sorry, okay, now we're back, we can get back to the action. It just bothers me.
Yeah, and no, I completely agree. I mean, I feel like a lot of what we're run on now is marketing and advertisement. It's all how can we get to know whoever that individual person is now more than ever with Facebook and Instagram and all these very specific focused social media. They know you probably just as well as you know yourselves, and so it's all so focused, and for it to be, you're so trapped into it and focused in, especially in a moment like this. And it's true, it's what makes any of that go around. There is, for the most part, there is no entertainment without advertisement.
And I don't know what the workaround is, but I have that thought. There's some speculation how possibly 1 in 12 people could think that this original broadcast was real. One of the really kind of curious setups that I found was the first time that anyone in the entire world broke into a radio program ever was only a year prior, when American reporters broke in to inform people of activity in Nazi Germany live, interrupting other broadcasts and what they were listening to. So the Orson Welles dramatization in 1938 was only 1 year on the heels of the first time anyone had experienced a news
And that one was obviously real
Yeah.
and unfortunate. So I could see how people, I mean, that would make sense if people, if they only tune in for a little bit, they're like, hey, I listened to that one year ago. I only need to hear this 45 seconds to 3 minutes of this to know, all right, I'm going to take action. I'm not going to sit here and listen to this radio broadcast. Like, if this is real, I'm getting out of here now. I'm going to escape to maybe New York, and then they come to figure out later on they're in the car. It's like, oh, they're going to New York. It's like, oh, shit. Well, I got to turn around and go to Pennsylvania now or anywhere else. I could see how people could see it being real.
Yeah. The actor who faked dying on the scene, he was a reporter that was reporting live from the crash site where the aliens were, and he starts choking on gas. He said that he watched the live report from the Hindenburg and tried to copy the reporter who was covering that live case, and he tried to emulate him as best as possible. So while people can be surprised, even when you listen to it, to think, how did anyone believe this? You had professionally trained audio actors trying to get people at home to believe this as much as they could.
Yeah, this is a production company. I mean, the advancements we've had in sound effects and all these different things, if they tried to do this today, those sound effects would be so lifelike that we would literally never know. They could have a massive crowd of sound like running away in fear, because we have so many movies that all they have to do is go pull that one clip, and all of a sudden they have a screaming horde of zombies, or a giant crowd running away from a meteor, alien noises, and a latch door opening. Like, they can do anything they want. I think it'd be cool if they brought it back on another anniversary, maybe like the 100-year anniversary of it. They bring it back and do an event and try and scare the world.
I saw a list of all the times it have been reproduced in some format, and it's hundreds.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
They've tried it a lot.
Yeah. They're just not as popular because people don't freak out anymore. I remember I went to a place called Castle of Muskogee in my childhood. It was about an hour away from where I lived. It was a huge haunted house. And on the way back, we listened to the broadcast. They replayed the original.
Oh, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, when I was a kid in Oklahoma.
I hadn't heard of it probably until high school, and the first time I listened to it was before this podcast. I obviously have known the book and know what it's about, but I'd never heard the radio transmission from his son of actually performing it and seeing what went into it.
From the first time that I listened to the broadcast, I thought it was funny that they went to professors. I mean, maybe that was a thing in the 30s, but right now, CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, they're not going to cut to a professor. So, listener, if you thought that was strange that we included a random professor out in rural Kansas, that was just an homage to the original broadcast.
Especially in the original, if they're first starting off, hey, we noticed these weird events happening from Mars. Let's see, who can we trust? Who do we go to? Ah, professor, they'll know.
Right.
But I mean,
I just feel like it'd be NASA or maybe the Air Force.
Exactly. I feel like nowadays it'd be different. I don't think they'd go to a local, especially middle of Kansas. Like, I don't think that would be the first option of a national group of people being like, all right, where should we go? I mean, we have a giant telescope in Hawaii. Its pure goal is to notice things. Like, it's one of the better telescopes just because it's dark enough, the big enough telescope. I feel like they'd go somewhere more like that where it'd be a more accurate.
I feel like they'd send military or NASA personnel. They'd send their own people and their own eyes.
Yeah.
But I guess if you only had less than 30 minutes to react, which I tried to keep it on a more realistic time scale. You had mentioned that the time is very off. One of the things that Orson Welles was bothered by is he said in an hour, men traveled long distances, large bodies of troops were mobilized, cabinet meetings were held by the U.S. president and military, savage battles fought on land and air. Millions of people accepted this emotionally and logically, all within a 40-minute time span.
As being 100% truthful, this is happening now. And that's exactly my first. I'm with you, Orson, because they're all a bunch of idiots, if you ask me.
Yeah.
And it's so hard looking back at it, because again, hindsight's 2020. We know what's going on. I feel like if you use any sort of common sense or you listen longer, again, like I already said, if it were to happen now, maybe people wouldn't even listen. And even then, probably wouldn't listen more than 10 minutes because they want to help themselves. But you listen any longer than that, you keep it on. We have devices in our hands that can play radio nonstop. So I think it'd be different that we can carry around that source. You'd wait until the first continuity error or the first, hey, this is not real, and all of a sudden everything's okay.
Mm-hmm. I have a question for you.
Shoot it.
2 answers, both the original in 1938 and today in 2019. Let's say something actually did happen, similar to either the Orson Welles story or the story that listeners listened to last week. Do you think that they would even broadcast that to people?
Honestly, I'm going to say no to both.
I think they'd be more likely back then, but I really don't think that if an alien invasion was underway, at first, I don't think the public would be told about it.
Or at least, depending on the scale, it would never be broadcasted in that way. It would be a classic, this is a severe weather warning event.
Right.
Except for they'd have someone on saying, this is not a drill. Legitimately go seek shelter. We are going to die. If they thought it would get that bad. I do think they'd do that, but they would never broadcast. There would never be a camera crew.
And it wouldn't be ahead of time.
Standing there. Yeah, exactly. They wouldn't have the warning of, hey, we have these weird signals coming in. Again, unless a professor notices it and maybe they take it to NASA or take it to the government and they're like, oh, this is nothing. So they take it to the media instead, and then maybe that's the way it gets out as a preemptive, but not in the way of that the media knows it first and then they go look for a professor.
Well, this year they had reported sightings from 3 different Navy pilots that happened about 14 years ago, and they didn't release those documents until now. And the behavior of these UFOs is incredibly suspect. It's very eerie and creepy, and they waited 14 years to tell anyone about that. It really makes you wonder, at what points in human history have people contemplated, should we tell people about this now, or should we wait and see what type of situation it unfolds into?
I mean, there's so many events that we know have happened that have, all the details are classified. I mean, the JFK assassination.
Roswell,
all these different things either are still classified or just barely became declassified. The amount redacted from it all isn't enough to paint the full picture. We will never get to know every single event that went on for a lot of these different things. So it makes sense that they wouldn't tell us until either A, it's going to kill half the population, so they need to tell us now, or B, maybe it's 80 years down the line, they're like, hey, okay, cool. Now we'll give you some sort of it because we feel like we have to. But I mean, none of the original people who were involved in it are there anymore, so it doesn't even really matter.
Years later, when they asked Orson Welles about why he did this or what he thought about it, hindsight being 20/20 and looking back on it, he said he did this prank because he wanted people to not be trusting of everything they heard from media and news. And it's kind of a hot take. It depends on whether you agree or not with Radiolab episode. Again, I highly encourage you listen to that, listener. It's called War of the Worlds by Radiolab. But they present this case where perhaps Orson Welles did the exact opposite, and he inspired a type of broadcast that unfolded live. And this is one of the criticisms of current news, is that we'll get people on the scene and we'll start broadcasting updates and details before we even know what's going on. Used to be there would be nothing on the news until they had kind of figured everything out in hindsight. But now we put people on scene, we put reporters in danger because people want to know now, they want to know immediately, and we want to know the details as they're happening. They made this point that the reason a news anchor was called an anchor is it was supposed to anchor you emotionally and make you feel okay about the news that you were hearing. But now we kind of like drum people's emotions up. We do the opposite. We want to get you upset so that you'll endure the next commercial break and stay with us as we unravel the details.
It's all a bunch of clickbait, getting you to come back for that next thing. I mean, it's true. Did it really? This was like kind of one of the first things that ever, even though it was a fake event, that ever had an anchor there live.
Yeah, it was a year after the first time in human history they ever did it. So it was one of the first. And I think it got a lot more media attention because it was fake and it did upset people. And so almost in a sad way got more attention than the real news, which was World War II that was unfolding.
Yeah. I think the idea behind it is really accurate, and especially more today than ever. If at the time in 1939 that he felt there was a problem not to believe everything you hear or read, even nowadays where we have the entire internet at our access and we are instantly updated. The alarm on my phone has a feature that if I let it go long enough, it'll tell me the headlines of the day. So, I mean, we are literally spoon-fed this information. Some people try and warn, hey, don't believe everything. Check your sources, check where it's coming from, and read into it. Don't just believe everything you hear. That may have furthered the problem.
I wonder if we showed the people who did the original 1938 broadcast what news would be like in 2020, what they would think of what they were about to do, if they'd still do it, if they'd alter it anyway, if they'd still say, oh, it's just a prank, it'll be fine. What newscasters and people on radio would think if they knew, where news outlets would be heading.
Putting myself in the shoes, I'd think, oh, I didn't have anything to do with this. But I mean, what if you had the ability to change how it all went down and be like, this is what it is, and this is what it would have been without your broadcast, and then let them decide and see what they think. Because honestly, I feel like they probably would have modeled their whole story more over what news is like today than even before, because it's, like you said, it's so shock and awe, and come back and listen to more because we have some ads for you to listen to, but we want you to watch them all so we get paid, and then come back and get the information you want. So
Tyler, do you have any last thoughts here for our recap episode of Breaking News?
This just in, it's a hit. You've talked about all the different throwbacks to this certain event. I love the idea of you paying homage to it and making it and keeping it true that, oh, this is just a prank. And what a cool ability that we have on a podcast to be able to share an event like this, that in all actuality, all we would have to do is take this and put it on a radio station. And it is basically no different than what the people listened to before. I mean, you can't get that same entertainment, that same media presence on television anymore, because for me, if I'm watching TV, you want to be visually stimulated. I know if it's a monotonous scene or it's kind of boring, I'm probably going to pull out my phone and play a game or check on Reddit or do something different. In this case, where all you have to do is listen, for me, it's like reading a book, but I mean through audio, that your mind will picture everything you need, so you can stay focused in on that.
Yeah. I have a lot of people in my life who listen to podcasts and they dabble at different rates, but something I've always found interesting, and hearkening back to 1938 when this broadcast came out. If this were 1938, tonight, all of us, after we ate dinner or whatever we did at home, we would sit around and listen to the radio. And a lot of people who listen to radio or podcasts now, they reserve it for one place, in the car. And people kind of give me a strange look when I'm like, yeah, I listen to podcasts when I cook, when I'm getting ready, when I'm just around the house. It'd be really easy for me to imagine being back in 1938, because I'm a person who consumes radio, music, podcasts when I'm at home, not just in the car, right? I have friends who will only listen to podcasts exclusively while they commute. And then it's just kind of like, that's where they listen to it.
I have a lot of friends who do the gym too.
Yeah. But used to be, back in 1938 when this came out, radio was what people did. It was your entertainment. There was no TV. You could either read or listen. And if we didn't have electricity and the lights went down and it was just candlelight at night, chances were we were listening to the radio. Yeah. And we might have thought for a 45-minute to an hour-long period that we were being invaded by Martians. So, listener, I'm going to leave you, before Tyler closes out, I'm going to leave you with how they ended the original 1938 broadcast. And this was the last time they assured people that this recording was not real, but by then, it was too late. This is Orson Welles, ladies and gentlemen, out of character to assure you that the War of the Worlds has no further significance than as the holiday offering it was intended to be. The Mercury Theater's own radio version of dressing up in a sheet, jumping out of a bush, and saying, boo. Starting now, we couldn't soap all your windows and steal all your garden gates by tomorrow night, which tomorrow night was going to be Halloween. So we did the next best thing. We annihilated the world before your very ears and utterly destroyed the CBS. You will be relieved, I hope, to learn that we didn't mean it, and that both institutions are still open for business. So goodbye, everybody, and remember the terrible lesson you learned tonight. That grinning, glowing, globular invader of your living room is an inhabitant of the pumpkin patch, and if your doorbell rings and nobody's there, it was no Martian, it's just Halloween.
And with that, death comes for us all. Thank you for listening. Next time, we return with a brand new audiobook story, assuming the world is still standing by then.
We would like to thank Kevin MacLeod for his music found on Incompetech.com.